Before we begin, a very happy belated Teachers' Day to you all. So yesterday the world has celebrated the World Teachers' Day, and from the SF ClassNet team, we want to thank you for all the amazing education activities that you do to empower your students and to make the world a better place. So thank you. And welcome to the first thematic webinar for this school collaboration on holistic learning environments for innovative teaching and learning. And today's session will address the topic, inclusion in a digital teaching and learning environment. So as you already know, my name is Jyoti. I coordinate the SF ClassNet project together with my colleague Angie, who is also here today. And today we have a fantastic speaker for whom inclusion is very, very important. And he strongly advocates for inclusion and helps educators build resources to advance inclusive teaching and learning environment. So his name is Stephen Zelko, and he comes from Australia, and he's currently the coordinator for inclusive resource development at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia. He's going to introduce himself, and he's going to talk more about what his role in the field of inclusion. So without further ado, I hand over to Stephen, and hopefully you'll have a great session today. So Stephen, the floor is yours. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours.
Thank you, Jyoti. Just before I get to my slides, I just want to thank the foundation for letting me speak about a topic that I'm pretty passionate about. I've been in inclusion for almost 2 decades, so it's a pretty important topic, and it's very sort of timely as well with the sort of hybrid environment that we've got going on, that we include as many people as possible in that environment. So yeah, thank you again for letting me come and talk to everybody. Thanks for coming along, everybody, as well. Feel free to throw stuff in the chat. I like a good sort of back and forth. There's going to be a lot of engagement in this, so it's not going to be me yelling at you guys for an hour. We're going to set out some breakout rooms, have you guys talk about the actual topic, come back and have a look at it. But I'll start with the actual presentation. So yeah, as was mentioned, it's the topic of the discussion is inclusion in a digital environment, and that is me. I like to start a lot of my talks with this quote, and it is framed in this way for a very specific reason. This is considered an accessible format for a student. So by any metric, actually, can you guys actually see? You can't. There it is there. Okay. This is a quote that I like from Mark Twain, but it's considered this is an accessible format. So by a lot of metrics, a lot of online metrics, a lot of digital metrics, this is considered an accessible format for most students. But why I include this usually at the start of my presentations is that it shows you exactly what the world looks like from the perspective of a student who gets a format that they can't actually use. So this is what it would look like for someone like me who's dyslexic. When I pick up a format that isn't useful to me, it is as useful as this is to you. So that's kind of the theme for a lot of the discussion we have around inclusion is how useful is the thing to the person that you're actually making it for. The actual quote is as follows: travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth or one's lifetime. I like that quote because it tells us that what we need to do is actually broaden the way that we do things in our perspectives and our mindsets. Instead of narrowing them, when we narrow them, we become quite a dangerous thing altogether. The agenda for today's discussion is as follows. There's a brief introduction, so I'm going to give you a kind of an outline on what it is that I do and what I've been doing for a long time. We're going to split out into some breakout rooms and discuss some broader questions on inclusion, what you guys think inclusion currently is, what you think, why you think it exists, what's important about it. And I've also got one question in there as well. This is again another one that's sort of that is another thought-provoking question because it illustrates quite well exactly why inclusion kind of is for everybody. It's not just for a small segment of the population. The Q&A is when we can sort of go back and forth and discuss practical solutions. So stuff that I use on a daily basis, dealing with students and dealing with institutions and policy and academia as well, and all sorts of levels. So I'll get a bit into it more when I do the introduction, but I sort of work through secondary school and tertiary as well, discussing measures to sort of combat exclusive sort of exclusionary sort of behavior. So yeah, as to an introduction, I started working in inclusion, probably started working in inclusion prior to actually working in inclusion. I have an older sister who's heavily mentally handicapped, and I grew up in a household that kind of made inclusion was part of the discussion at all times. It was always, what can we do for Steph? You know, what can we do for her? What does she want to do, kind of thing. So I've always been a part of the discussion. And then I went and did a degree, and found out after I finished my degree, I did an English lit degree, and found out after the degree that I was actually dyslexic. So I barged my way through an English degree, not knowing that I wasn't reading the same way everyone else was. I found that out by studying. I was invited to come and work for a department that was newly formed at La Trobe University, called the Inclusive Resource Department, and they were meeting the newly formed disability legislation that came into Australia quite a number of years ago now. So in Australia, it's mandated that students get a quote unquote normative experience, regardless of their disability. And this comes off the back of some educational reform in the US in the late 70s, I think. Yeah, so Australia picked that up and then started to include it in tertiary towards the end of the 90s. And that's essentially where I came in. For the last probably 15 years, I've worked for a department that helps students. So essentially a student would come to the university or come to the institution, and they would say they needed help with their resources, and this department would take all those resources and turn them into something they could use. So a case in point would be we have one student who is he's fully blind, and he is studying 5th year statistics, and we create braille imagery. So we turn all of his statistical sort of data and his graphs and all sorts of, you know, stuff that he needs essentially to understand the topic. We turn it into braille imagery. That's one example of the kinds of things that we would do. That was kind of the previous role. The current role now is much more sort of proactive. So previously the work would have come into the department, and we would have worked on it without the student knowing about it. And then the student would just get the documents after we're done with them. And that would mean that they're included. The current role now is much more sort of proactive. We go out now and I deal with academics directly. I deal with educators directly on how to create resources from inception. So stuff like even, you know, Zoom calls, Teams meetings, all sorts of spearheading all sorts of things that might start the process from the creation of the document. So procurement, going to publishers. So, you know, when you're getting a textbook, I go now to publishers and I talk to them about exactly what it means to create an accessible document from a publishing standpoint. So I'm part of now sort of the whole chain rather than just currently at the end of it. I'm seeing a comment here. Digital inclusion is being able to use digital devices such as computers or smartphones and the internet. Yes, absolutely. I think it probably extends further than that, and you're going to see a little bit of that towards the end of the conversation after the breakouts. I think digital inclusion probably extends to how we create all sorts of content, even you know, even face-to-face should have some part of digital inclusion as part of the plan. And that's what it's a lot of the work that I do at La Trobe at the moment is, okay, so how do we make a hybrid working environment for lectures. So if a student, even if a student comes to a lecture, how do we make sure that it's digitally inclusive when it's not necessarily, you know, on face value, it doesn't necessarily need to be digitally inclusive because it's face-to-face. It should be digitally inclusive for a number of reasons. So yeah, we're going to push on here. So yeah, we're gonna move on now to the breakout room session. And what I want, yeah, I've got sort of 4 questions here for you to think about, and I'll be jumping into them, and Geordie and Angie I think will be in them as well. But what do we want to know is what do people currently think inclusion means? What do we think digital inclusion means? What does it mean in regards to education? Because they are 2 different questions. And the big one for me is, why do we think inclusion from a general point of view and from an educational point of view is important? And the last question is just a really, it's one that I like to throw in there because it's an interesting one. What is 28 plus 47? But more importantly, how did you work it out? Because it illustrates a really interesting point. So if you need to write those down, I think the docs are being linked in the working docs are being linked in the chat at the moment. There are also some short links there for you as well if you need to, if you're actually just typing them out. If you need me to go back or you need me to throw them in the chat, if you want the questions in the chat, I can do that as well. Just let me know. But yeah, we're going to break out into some rooms and get everyone talking.
Thank you, Steve. So for everyone's quick note, so I have already shared the link to the Google Doc for your discussion on the chat box. So I think one helpful way would be to kind of note down your discussion points so that when you come back to the main room, then you can share. And also maybe you can appoint someone, a team member who will be sharing your findings in the bigger group, and also you all can contribute to the conversation. For now, give me a quick minute because some participants just joined, so I need to recreate the breakout rooms. So I'll do that very quickly. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to open the breakout room now. So just to quickly check, Steve, they will have 15 minutes, right?
Yeah, what we're looking at is about 5 minutes a question, and that 27 to the last question shouldn't take very long.
Okay, we'll coordinate then when we close the breakout room. So I'm going to open them now, and good luck with your discussion.
What I'm going to do is quickly share the question again. But what I want is someone from one of the other groups to tell me what inclusion is, and what they got from their groups. So group number 2, maybe.
I'm representing group 2. So I just need just a confirmation, Steven. Do I have to answer only the first question, or it's all the points?
We'll go for this first one just for now, and then we'll move on collectively, I think.
So my question is, what is inclusion?
Yep. What did your group sort of come to as a definition, maybe?
If we go by the Dakar Convention, it says education for all. And I think different nations have a different, policies to ensure that every child, is with the eligible schooling age is in the school at the right time. And in India, we have a right to education, and I think education for all is a universal thing. So when we say for all, it is irrespective of ethnicity, diversity, economic background, and physical disabilities, learning abilities. Now our classrooms are, if you see, culturally we may be divided also within the same country. So we have classrooms which are very big, heterogeneous. So difference in the ability, difference in the style of learning. This is one aspect of what we look at the students, and of course economic background is one such. So inclusion is we are including everyone irrespective of what they are, who they are, and we are, as an educationist, objective is to realize all of them, their potential, help them to maximize their potential and achieve what they are able to. Thank you.
That's great. Anyone from group number 3 want to jump in there with their definition as well? I'm guessing it's probably going to circle around the same sort of thing.
I think I have to respond for group number 3. Okay, so we were saying that the same opportunities are for everybody. So we wanted to we're there to make sure no child is left behind. So that quote was lovely from somebody said that. And that we have multi-model learning. Well, that's sort of moving in. We sort of talked about the first 2 together. So I'll just say what we talked about. So the same opportunities, so the same equal opportunities for everybody, that we're facilitating maybe multi-model learning. So the formats are visual, sound, text, that we have varied accessibility formats and various sources that are there for everybody. But inclusion is also very important in society for us to be accepted. I thought that was a really nice point somebody made, that we are included ourselves as well. So when we're talking about it in education, but also about in society in general, that we enrich our society with all of the different types of people we are. So we're including that and enriching our society by doing it. I think I'm moving into another question though. I better stop now.
No, that's great. That's great. It was definitely set in a way that would make you think of the 2 different spheres. So inclusion as a general sort of idea, and the inclusion as a inclusion in education, because and the group that I was with, we kind of teased out the reasons why, because often when we and I'll quickly throw in what they said prior to getting to it, the idea that yeah, stuff like includes all learners regardless of background, potentiality, all this sort of stuff was included in their answer for inclusion as well. But moving on to the inclusion education, the reason why I set that kind of question is the idea that when we can talk about inclusion from a moral standpoint. We can say we're morally obliged and it's a good idea and all this sort of stuff. But the thing that I kind of went to for education is, how do we justify the work, and also how do we justify the optics? I have a student who's sitting next to a student who's getting seemingly extra work done for them in order to facilitate their learning. How do I sit there with that student and say, this is the normal process and this is justified to them? What do I say to that student? And one of the things I said to my group was, if I have someone coming out from the outside and I say, you know, they're a plumber or a bricklayer or something, I say, I do all this work for this one student and the 99 other students in that class don't get the same sort of attention. That person would probably say to me, how do you justify the work? Not that it's not right. It's not a question of morals. It's not a question of right or wrong, but why do the work? Because as we would know, we're all time poor in education. We're underpaid, overworked, and we don't have time to see every student. So then how do we get down to that fundamental question of education? Why focus on this student and why focus on inclusion? I'll ask the other
bar.
Say again?
To bring them up to the equal level, just to bring them up to the equal level of the person. So we did a worldwide global schools thing recently, and it was sort of like that. It was like you could use that image for everybody. So that, you know, the one with the people in a line and someone's on a box. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sorry, that just came into my head.
Sorry, I had myself on mute. It's right there. It kind of does beg this question of why do it, but my group really I labored on the point that still doesn't answer the why. From a case by case scenario, it answers the case. It intrinsically has a value to it, and we all get it. You know, from a moral standpoint, we should be bringing the least of us up and all this sort of stuff. But from a practical standpoint, how do you navigate? Because one of the questions I get asked a lot from educators is when is enough work and when is it too much work? So how do I raise up a student? We had a student who we graduated after 10 years. She got her master's and she was both blind and deaf. And she ended up getting really, really good marks. But we often got from her educators, they said, well, how do we facilitate this person learning? You know, where's the threshold? And I love that question because it often reveals the idea that that I get nothing from it. So the student sitting next to that student is getting, we promote the idea that this student over here is getting nothing from this student getting all these benefits. And I think that's a myth. I think it's bunk. And I say this because, and these are leading questions, but from my experience working in education and working in inclusion, the stuff that we as educators do for these students often filters back to the quote unquote average student. You know, transcriptions are my favorite version of it. I don't know about you guys, when I watch a movie now, the only thing I have to have subtitles on when I watch the movie, because it enhances my viewing experience. But without someone being deaf, we would never have closed captions in films. So these things that we do as educators, they're informing the wider community's access to it. It is the differences between students that actually make the changes that the students see down the line. And I think this is one of the things we perpetually forget. We think it's an add-on. We think, oh, I've got to put a ramp for a student with a wheelchair. I've got to make an audio description for a person who's blind. I have to do all of these things to bring that person up, which is what you were saying, Claire. I've got to bring them up to normal. No. You're enhancing the experience tangentially as well, because what you're doing, those things benefit the student sitting next to that student as well, and they will. That's that holistic part of that inclusive learning, and that's kind of why I set that question a little bit. Can I go to the second and third groups about that inclusive question? Because was there more of a teased out discussion about inclusion in education, or was it merely just from a teaching standpoint, and you know, where you guys kind of got to with it? I know I kind of hijacked it there, but yeah.
May I?
Please.
So there's one thing with this, one point is, what do you mean? I mean, when we come to inclusion, we are not trying to bring everybody on the same platform, which is, you know, something, each student is individual. So our discussion was more, you know, pro-education, and so bringing them to one platform, having a, you know, homogeneous strategies to, it's because we as, you know, as a society are heterogeneous, and we also have to make ourselves understand and students that diversity in a classroom or diversity has to be accepted, and it is essential for a tolerant society. So, I mean, everybody contributes to the society. Maybe at that age, student might, you know, the peer group might not be able to understand why we have a, you know, differently able student in our classroom, and why school supporting, and it is a kind of, everybody has to adjust with, you know, all these slight changes here and there. But then what we are looking at a tolerant society for tomorrow, it's everybody has to understand that that kind of scaffolding is required. Yes, schools have to, there are schools which claim to be inclusive, but they are inclusive in a, you know, certain aspect, like you have a mandatory, you know, admissions for the lower income group, but it is much more than special needs. So what was discussed, that every school in different countries have special needs department. So you basically looking at, you know, learning disability and learning gaps. Gaps are again a very big challenge. Learning disabilities, you have a scaffolding provided by the special educators. And we've discussed in Philippines, there is a system where students who have out of the school for many years can join, there's a channel for them to join a common formal schooling. That's, I think, in every country we have for the school dropouts, you know, how to bring them into mainstream. And I think every board, like I teach in a national board, have certain concessions to students with a certain disability, or I'll say differently able kids, where they get for an hour, they get 15 minutes extra. So they get 45 minutes extra for, you know, 2.5 hour exam or 3 hour exams. And there is a help support in the form of scribe, and also a calculator, which is not allowed up to high school in certain countries. So we are looking at not leaving, as I said, there is a universal umbrella that is education for all, not looking at to make them as everybody as look similar with the similar abilities. With their abilities, people acknowledge and then everyone to have a good, joyful learning in school. So that is, I think, it's essential more than, looking at the skill. And then technology has its role in uplifting or, upskilling and enhancing education for all.
Yeah, I'm curious the role of technology in digital inclusion, because, okay, so I guess a question I could ask everybody is, do you think it would be, what would be more preferable? Would it be to have a situation where you can cater to the students' needs infinitely? So the student comes to you and says, I'm blind, I need audio descriptions in all of my work, or all the material, or do you think that that if the student didn't need to disclose it, that would be more preferential? Because there's pros and cons for both those avenues. So what do people think? Would you rather have somewhere where you had the student's needs were catered to absolutely, or that the student never needed to disclose and they could just use the material as it is? Because it goes back to what you were just saying about sort of homogenization about resources. So yeah, what do people think?
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's actually, when we say inclusive, we have like visually challenged students. So it's not we don't have a completely segregated, designated unit for them. They sit 1 to 5 periods in integrated, this education is integrated mode, and later on skill based. So because again, it's a government mandate not to cater to these kind of things, keep, giving it a complete, cover as a special or, challenge student. Integrate them into mainstream is also important. So this is what is a policy we follow in India. I think every nation is looking for, integration. So that's how I feel it should be.
Martina, you're going to say something?
Yeah, so first of all, I think we should always take into consideration the specific needs. Of course, there are different, some students can obviously follow a mainstream curriculum syllabus, and others can't because of their disability. But I think maybe the goal should be the same. So we have the same goal, and then maybe the means to achieve it, so we can, by means of offering compensation or different, measures, so we should help the students achieve the same goal, right? So this is what, yeah, I think we do in Italy as well.
Anybody else with some thoughts?
To your exact question, if I would rather have a student without a need, or without saying that he needs something, in a normal way, yes, because it helps with the organization of the lessons and everything. But as we know that each of us is completely different, I have to accept that student has some needs, has some special needs. So I prepare for them everything what I can to help them to achieve their goals, what they say. If we say that he needs to go through the test of English, as I teach English, I help them, I do what I can to help them to achieve their goals. So it's something between, not to have, not to say everything I have to do, because it's impossible through the resources and organization. And on the other side, it's impossible just to ignore them that they need. So it's something between.
Rolf, you've got your hand up, and that'll be the last one for this. We're going to quickly go to the math question at the end to wrap it up with.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'd probably be sitting on the fence regarding your question. I'd probably go back to what was said earlier with regards to multimodal learning, that is addressing people's individual needs, and in some ways, this is in a sense, this is stating the obvious. We've all got special educational needs in some ways, and of course I'm also aware some of them are much more extreme than others, really. The other question there is what are in the sense that came through some of what other people were saying. The other question is, of course, what are we working towards? If I'm very pragmatic, I have to prepare my students for a certain type of qualification or exam that they have to achieve at some point. And so it's both supporting individual students, supporting class, but also looking at, okay, how do I get them where they need to be in order to take the next step in their overall education or training? And I think that's a really important question to keep in mind as well. What is our end goal in a sense?
That's essentially why I set the question, because a lot of the work that I do at the moment is upskilling students to advocate for themselves. Because what we found with 20 years of coming to the table for students and facilitating their needs wholly and trying to meet those normative requirements is that we actually left students going into the workplace or just going into the wider world, and they weren't really prepared for the adjustments they would have to make themselves. Which is, you know, we've kind of done them the disservice then. So that's why I lean more towards the non-disclosure model. If I can have a student go through the university or go through any education facility, and they can work the material for themselves, and they know the tools to a certain extent, that means they can leave with that knowledge as well. But we also do very complex students' needs as well. So it's kind of, it's a bit of both, really. I'm going to quickly go to the last question, because I've been told that there was some interesting discussion around the 28 plus 47 question. I didn't think there would be. It was more of a thought exercise, but I'm curious. I'm curious what this interesting discussion is. Does anyone have any ideas? I know in my group, I try to illustrate the fact, like say for me, for example, I take the 8 and the 7 and I make 15 out of them, and then I take the 20 and the 40 and I make 60 out of them, and I take 60 and I add it to 15 and I get the answer. But I think, and I know the reason I set that question is it underscores the fact that you can ask 10 people and get 10 different answers for that. There are plenty of ways to go about it. And it does suggest that what we're talking about at inclusion actually includes most people. We've got a sort of a through line of delivery mechanisms that we have for a lot of these practices that enough people come to, and we get away with it. But the reality is most people are thinking about most things differently all the time. So when we set things up to be preference-based and flexible, which is I was going to get to later on. Actually, you know what, I will quickly put them up. The principles for universal design, which is something I was going to mention, these sort of are a standard that we use for a lot of our stuff moving forward when it comes to educational resources. It talks about equitable use. The key ones for me, though, are flexibility, simple, intuitive, and sometimes low with physical effort, but mostly they're flexible and simple and intuitive. What we're talking about with those two is that it accommodates the preferences for non-disclosure. So when we create educational resources or any sort of material, we get something from a publisher, or we download a video or anything like that, is it flexible? Is it simple and intuitive? And does it meet equitable sort of access? And with those, when we are governed by those principles, the need for disclosure becomes a lot less. So we went, as an institution, we had, we see about 2,000 students out of about 40,000 students. I would argue it's probably, there's a lot more students that need our facilities than don't. But we went from, say, 80 students who needed note takers because they had visual impairments to about 6 by using some of these measures. So we were able to get rid of the vast majority of our students needing a separate person taking notes for them. They couldn't engage on their own merit. They couldn't engage on their own terms. By using these simple, like these top 3 measures, just by adhering to those principles, those students are now engaging on their own preference, and they don't have to disclose, and they can go about their education in the way that they want to. That's for us, that's the aim, and I think that's the aim for a lot of educators, is to kind of get out of the way to the student and let them get their potential, but you kind of you don't know exactly how to get to those points. We're really close to the end, and we should have had a long Q&A session. But does anyone have any questions? I'm happy to go through any of this sort of stuff. There are some resources at the end there that I want to include, some UDL guidelines, some digital guidelines. AdSet's a really great resource for all sorts of stuff that is inclusive in this space. But yeah, does anyone have any burning questions they want to ask?
Sorry, I have a question. Maybe I didn't understand what you really mean by disclose. Are you talking about autonomy on the part of the student? Is that what you are referring to here?
Yeah, they wouldn't need to come to a service and say, "Oh, I'm dyslexic," or "I'm," or any of these things. They wouldn't even need to tell the institution that they're in need of something. That would be for me, that's the kind of the aim for most students. There was always going to be a cohort of students that are going to need assistance. They have high complex needs, but the vast majority of students who would need a service, historically, they wouldn't need to disclose that they need a service, because the things that we're creating have high flexibility, have high equability, and are simple and intuitive to use as well. So that's where the disclosure comes in.
Oh, okay. Wow. Sorry. I think it's a very ambitious aim. I mean, wonderful, but I'm not sure. I agree that it would be fantastic, but the way I see it in our system would really be impossible. Sorry. We need, of course, to think about it, really. Everything should be changed in our Italian system. This is what, yeah, I think.
I think it's probably easier than they think it is, and I'm a two-man team, so I've got me and another guy, and we deal with 40,000 students on a daily basis. So I think it's probably easier than you think it is. There's a lot of regression. You regress back to a useful format or a useful approach. I think a lot of what we put out there at the moment is overwritten. It's over specialized. And that's why it's actually not usable. So stuff like, I mean, even small things like delivering educational resources in image formats like a PDF. Regressing back to something like a Word document means that a student who wants to listen to that document, they can do it without having to change it into something else. Simple things like that actually get you a fair way into that. So I don't think it's as big of I don't think it's a wholesale sort of change. I think there are a lot of things that you can do to actually bring those numbers all the way down. And as I said, we retired 74 out of 80 note takers for students by simply putting in some basic measures, upskilling the students in certain areas of note taking, and using different mediums to actually get them to take notes and get them to get the notes themselves. And that's something we did with the students. We didn't even have to do with the academics. Yeah. Claire,
yeah, no, I take
up.
your point. Yeah, I take your point now. In fact, you're right. Sometimes, I have the feeling that when I'm explaining something, that maybe if I use the Blackboard more, so I will really think about it and use it in my teaching more, thank you. It's very good. Yeah, this is what we should do, make it easier for everybody. Use the Blackboard more, maybe use the audio, medium more when you have a reading. Just make it, so it's accessible for everyone, not only for the specialist student, but for everyone else. Yeah,
that's exactly the point. Yeah,
thank you.
Claire. Claire, you got your hand up?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask you, is there a link you can send me to like your typical lesson or something like that, like your breakdown of how you do your intro, your demo, your evaluations at the end? And I'd love to just watch it. I think I'd learn a lot by seeing it myself if there was a video or.
Yeah, it's a really good question. No, we don't. Because it's usually case specific, or we haven't made something that's kind of just packaged, but it's a great idea, to be honest. Yeah.
If you're ever make it, send it to me.
Feel free to contact me. I should really put my my details. I should have put that's pretty bad. I should have put my details in, but feel free to contact me. I'm available to the wider community on how to do this stuff practically. I just spoke to University of Leeds only a couple of days ago on this exact thing. So, you know, if you've got practical questions, or you just want to, you know, chew the fat a bit more, feel free to contact me. This is what I essentially do every day. So they pay me to do it, which is good.
Thank you
No
so
problem at all.
much. It was so interesting. I really enjoyed your talk. So
thank you so much for coming along. Geordie, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, actually, it was really interesting and inspiring for me to, you know, I was jumping around the groups, and then, you know, how passionate you were to support your students and really bring the light, you know, on this important topic by discussing and sharing diverse perspectives. So thank you, Steve, for such an insightful session. And hopefully everyone took away something that's going to help them to, you know, make their learning environments better for their students. So just a quick note, Steve is currently writing an article on, you know, on the same topic, and why this topic is important for creating holistic teaching and learning environment. And we are publishing the article with the handbook, Impactful Teaching and Learning for Wellbeing, which will be available hopefully before you jump into the team learning session. So Stephen is working very hard to make it a great article for you. And then once it's ready, we'll be sharing the whole handbook with all the chapters. So with that, I don't have anything else to add. And you know, if, those of you who are in Europe, I think it's already lunchtime, and then in Asia, the day is already ending. So I think with this, we end today's session, and thank you everyone for active participation.